Okay, the first order of business, I've got a presentation for you. I think the front end of the presentation is a bit of history of the Burton water system and the hydro transfer to the RDPK. I don't know how much all of you know about that process and the history. Maybe a show of hands if you know about it. I could always kind of skip through that or just kind of skim over it a bit. I put it in there for people who may not be that familiar with it, but I can get to the meat and potatoes, I guess, of rates, some of the rate drivers and things like that. Maybe we can kind of focus the discussion today, if that works. So. Actually, this is a bit easier to do from the PowerPoint slides rather than a PDF. So I'm going to move to the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, so like I said, I've got a presentation for you, kind of some facts and figures about the system. Like I said, I was going to start out with that system history, but I'll blaze over that pretty quickly, and then we can get into, like I said, we really want to talk about financial plan, the 5-year financial plan. We'll delve into the 2025 budget in detail, the rates. We can discuss the capital works that you can see ongoing right now that have just started, and then spend a little bit of time on asset management planning, the asset management plan for Burton, and reserve contribution needs to make that system sustainable. So I can skip over this front end. So you've all been provided with a copy of the 2025 to 2029 board approved financial plan. Every year we produce financial plans with a 5-year window for all water systems. We operate 18 water systems, do this similarly for all those water systems. So you've got that board approved financial plan in front of you. Okay, it's also up on the screen. So, yeah, for 2025, 25% rate increase is what we've forecast, with future years at 20% increase in 2026. Yes, sir.
What you see is actually more details.
I'm looking at the detail one, but we're looking at the rolled up one right now.
No, but I wanted to mention that if anybody looks online at our financial plan, you won't see all that detail that you're seeing. So that's why we present this.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a detailed version. I've given you the detailed version that we work off of, and then there's a rolled up version for the board that we include in the financial plan. So yeah, quite the rate increase in this presentation. I'm going to kind of delve into the real drivers for that rate increase that you're seeing. Just really touch quickly on the capital project for 2025-2026. Replacement of in 2025 roughly 300 meters of end of life. We call it asbestos concrete water main. We're replacing that with a PVC water main. So we split that project out into two phases. That 2025 phase, we budgeted $520,000 for it. The 2026 phase, 230 meters of replacement, budgeted $330,000 for that section of it. We did talk to the crew down the road recently. They've just started the project, but we're hoping that'll go smoothly. It seems to be going smoothly so far without many utility conflicts or rocks or other unknown things during the dig. I'm going to flip for a second. We can flip back to the budget as I kind of go through the presentation and some of the details about your system. So like I mentioned, we operate 18 different water systems, and for each of those water systems, we have an asset management plan. So the asset management plan consists of an inventory of all the assets that system owns. So all the pipes, all the pumps, all the buildings, everything. Everything's provided a value or replacement value, a lifespan, and a number of other parameters that help make decisions on what to replace and when, and how much money you need in reserves to do that. It also helps us figure out whether we should be paying for this fully from reserves that are contributed by user fees, or leverage borrowing to varying degrees throughout the asset life. So we do asset management planning. Typically, we break it in kind of a short-term window. That short-term window is still quite long. It's a 25-year horizon of what needs to be replaced. And we've also got a 100-year horizon. We've got, from that process, and I'll show you in a later slide, helps us flush out required reserve contributions to put away to actually replace all of the infrastructure in a sustainable way. So for your system's valued, it has a replacement value of $6.7, actually almost $6.8 million. You can see the breakdown of where your money really is. Here's all the different aspects, components of the system. So you've got pipes, reservoirs, the SCADA system. SCADA is supervisory control and data acquisition. That's the computer architecture that provides alarming and control of a water system. So it'll alarm an operator to things like a low reservoir level or that a pump is down, things like that. Structures, we've got buildings in there, all the services, so we own all the services up to the hotline. Afterwards, they're private. And then equipment, varying things within the water system. You see from here, the vast majority, like in most systems, of the value of the system is buried underground in the street. It is the pipes. So you've got, of that $6.8 million, $6.76 million, the pipes account for $5.99 million of that. This is, if that amongst the users, we've got 54 active connections in the Burton system. So everybody owns really a piece of that $6.7 million. So just a bit of kind of delving into what we see in our asset management planning. We've got things like I said, split out between our linear assets, or our pipes, and then our vertical assets, the structures, things that you see above ground typically. And we've got, kind of all the details, again, that would help you make decisions on what you need to replace and when. Pipe material, all the different pipe materials have different estimated lifespans. Unfortunately, for a lot of these systems, the asbestos concrete mains were commonly installed, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They have a much shorter lifespan than we would like to see. Modern pipe materials, PVC, typically has an 80-year span is what we assume. Could even be up to 100 in some systems. For the asbestos concrete type pipe, we give that a 50-year lifespan. With the installation vintage of these systems in the mid to late 60s, we are at or past that surface life. That doesn't mean that everything in the ground is suddenly going to fail, but it does mean that it has a much higher likelihood of failure. So every pipe material has a decay curve, so to speak. After it's reached its estimated life, it begins to decay at a faster rate. Your brakes, your things like that become much more common. The kind of whole idea with proactive replacement of pipes is to really put your money into replacing your assets in the ground so you get a new asset, rather than waiting for things to break and having to be reactive in that repair. Putting a few repair clamps on a main could cost as much as replacing that main, and you don't get that long-term value out of that repair that you do out of a replacement. Yes. You can ask questions as they come up. Just stop me at any time. So typically with sewer systems, it's very common to CCTV them. With water systems, much less common to do that for a couple of reasons. One, they're always full of water. So you'd have to completely drain that system if you wanted to run a camera through it. There are other technologies. There's something called a Sahara ball, which is a tethered ball that they'll put through water pipes. Lots of cities do it. I've worked in some very large cities in water systems where we've done things like that. For a system like this, with the pipe size that we have, you can do it, but the cost to do it becomes prohibitive. By the time you've paid to do that inspection, you could have replaced quite a bit of main.
Can I ask what your question is? We are feeling that this asbestos pipe is somewhat different than other types of pipe where inspection.
We've got. So I mean, we do have you've got a groundwater source here. That groundwater source potentially is under the influence of surface water. So when there's a groundwater source that is somehow connected to surface water, there is a potential for those hits, those bacteriological hits in the system. That is the most likely source of those occasional bacteriological hits in the system. We've got, I don't know what year it was completed, we had a hydrogeological assessment of the well source, and those were really the general findings that it is likely, that well source is likely under the influence of surface water in some way. You might know a little more detail on that study, but that's the likely source.
And so you have a system where the community at the time decided for the feedback we've got for no chlorination. So you don't have a treatment that would address any form of bacterial contamination. So that's contributing to the increased risk in your system. The increased risk from pipe is more so when you have old steel pipes. They corrode on the inside, and they can be the surface area for accumulation of bacteria.
Bioslime, you get a bioslime layer on the
biofilm you always have in every pipe, but that is not a main concern for the types of pipes that you have. The main concern here for us is softness. When asbestos pipes start to get soft, and they'll become irreparable. That can come from the outside, if you have an area that's relatively wet, or you have acidic soils and so on, or it can come from the inside also. The problem is when you do not replace them in time, at some point you simply can't put a clamp on anymore. They collapse when you try to put a clamp on them. And that's where that's our responsibility to not let it get to that point. Hard to determine when you are there. So far we are not. But part of the problem is you can't replace in not the only system that has just asbestos pipe or a lot of asbestos pipe. It's impossible for us to replace. So that's the tricky part. When do we replace what?
Let's see. So, like I said, we've got an estimated surface life of all these pipes in the system. That column is actually here. I know you can't read it. Everything in red is actually at end of life, so it's surpassed that date that we normally want to replace it. So a big component of your system has already kind of aged out, so to speak, and is past due for replacement. And again, not to say that it's going to fail right away, but it will fail. Yeah, I've got another slide with just asbestos stuff. Yeah, this next slide actually is a photograph of one of the pipes that we pulled out of the ground in here. So we have done some laboratory testing on asbestos concrete water mains. I don't think we've done it in Burton. I think we've done it in Edgewood, West Robson, and possibly one of the Preston systems. Anyways, we handle, because these asbestos concrete pipes are kind of so unique with that lower than typical lifespan, higher rate of failure, and we haven't even talked about the difficulty handling them. There's work safe requirements in handling asbestos of all forms, including asbestos pipes, so cutting it, disposing of it. That adds significant cost to every construction project that we have. So, we've got. So you can speak to that. I don't know the details on that. I haven't touched it. So it would be an empty pipe, and I'll speak to that too because I've got the policy as well. I speak to that too. So yeah, there's unique removal, disposal, handling costs, and dangers that go along with the asbestos pipe that you have to build into your replacement cost. That said, the RDCK has been pretty proactive in trying to manage those costs and that risk. We've got an asbestos decommissioning policy, a board-approved policy that helps kind of manage costs and help us make decisions with regard to how we address asbestos pipe removal and replacement, and it does for an abandon in place option. In certain cases. So, I won't delve into the details. I can always provide you with a copy of the policy, but really depending on, the health and safety risk of a certain project and the cost to remove versus to abandon the pipe in place. In certain cases, like Julie mentioned, some sections of those pipes will be left in place. They're not live pipe, they'll be left in place. There's a whole policy, included in that policy, and we've got to mark that location. We've got to know where it is for potential future removal. But again, at that risk of cutting down a tree, digging it up, potentially creating more worker hazards with working around that difficult to get to pipe triggers that decision to leave it in place, and it makes economic sense as well. We do that. We'll have record of it, and on the CAC for sure. We'll share that with you. I don't know if we'll share that publicly where it is, but
going forward, we will show the project schedules and so every time we do it, we can go back to this company what we have done or not. Sometimes it is a function of budget as well, but mainly it depends on the cost of the removal of the pipe. The policy currently says if the cost of removing asbestos pipe is more than 50% of the cost of installing the new pipe, we will not do it. And you have seen the outcomes cost and so on, and we've talked lots about this more. It's really cost prohibitive at some point. Currently, that cutoff is 50% off the new.
yes. The per meter cost of the pipe, I'd have to look. I can follow up with that with you. Again, there's multiple things kind of rolled up into that project cost. It's not always just.
Is project cost,
yeah.
But a very typical cost can be in the range up to $1,000 per meter.
Yeah.
But it's anywhere between $400 to $1,000.
Yeah. And we update those costs too. We have a number of projects ongoing every year. We also do an industry scan of what it costs to replace pipes. We've got numbers from our recent projects. And then we've also got what seems to be more contractors bidding on these projects too, and that makes it for a more competitive marketplace and a better cost for us as well.
And to be clear, that cost includes as well the servicing fees. So if you have a cross road to service a property across the road, typically the replacement of the truck stops each property, some of the main lines that are being installed, any transformers or heavy crossings that we do, so that's the all-in cost, and we think about $400 to $1,000 a year.
Yeah. We do. We've got a project. We've got a dedicated. Yeah. So it's a public process. There's a RDCK bids and tenders website that has all the projects on it. These projects typically go out as tender that bidders bid on. We've also got a project management group within the RDCK that manages these projects and really makes sure that we have a minimum of change orders or unknowns in these projects. So I know that the project manager for this project was out with the interested bidders maybe a couple of weeks ago. Walking the route, identifying any potential issues before they put in their price bid. Again, so that we make sure that we don't run into problems or butt heads down the road. If somebody says, there's some unknown.
Last year and this year, we saw a lot more interest and pricing. The 3, 4, 5 years before, we saw a steady and hefty increase of bidding prices. So in this, I believe we had 7 valid bids on this, which is pretty good for a small size project like this. So we were quite happy, and the lower bids were very close together, which is an indication we were successful. No, will not, but maybe I'll let you talk a little bit more about the infrastructure cost.
Sure.
Let's finish that off, and then we'll speak a little bit about the pressure points that we have in the system.
So, like I said, that asset management plan that we have, so, like I said, it's got an asset inventory of everything we own, our estimated service life, where those individual pieces of infrastructure are at in their service life, and what it costs to replace, and then also a forecast replacement year. We leverage publicly available computer program for this. It's a kind of water system specific computer program that does both kind of that asset management component and also helps do financial modeling, so it can forecast out, what sustainable reserve contributions look like with different assumptions, what different borrowing scenarios look like. If you want to do a mix of paying for your replacements with leveraging your reserve, and a bit of borrowing, and kind of find out a sweet spot of what makes most sense for the users of the system. Also, with looking at those kind of shorter term windows, that 25-year window and the 100-year window, we don't want to front load all of the infrastructure replacement needs on the current generation of users. We want to be able to spread out that burden as much as we can across a reasonable time frame. Again, when we've got a lot of infrastructure that's in the ground and is the same vintage and is aging out at the same time, that brings in is kind of own challenges. So everything's kind of reaching the end of life at the same time. So there is only so much wiggle room that we have in delaying or deferring infrastructure replacement without, again, getting into that scenario where we'd be going out and doing repairs on mains that are potentially unrepairable. Like we said, putting a clamp on a soft asbestos concrete main just doesn't work. So now you're suddenly paying for a main replacement when you didn't plan to, and you're not getting a good price for it. So
one of the pictures going to be used when they remove the asbestos pipe. We don't have a close look at the condition of the pipe.
yeah,
Even the tests that Chris mentioned earlier, they were actually done in laboratory. The last year's BC Hydro owned the system, but these tests are very expensive. I want to say they are running close to $5,000 test meanwhile. The other thing is they give you only a certain fee for about 5 years max. And that's what we had at the time when we assessed the system. Many pipes that we take out have still a good reasonable firmness that gives us the confidence that we have the 5 years or so. Even if we don't shoot a test, we try to, but it's meanwhile even hard to find a lab that does these types of tests. But yeah, we try to assess all the time what the condition of the pipe is and the urgency to replace the That's interesting.
yeah, sure. So like I said, we do leverage that asset management plan to help inform, what a sustainable reserve contribution looks like for a system. So you can see in this slide, it's a little fuzzy on screen, it's clear in the handout. We've got something called ACSO. That acronym means the annual cost of sustainable ownership, and it speaks to different measures that you might want to leverage to inform what you need for reserve contribution. So in the asset management world, often it's if you don't have a very mature asset management plan, and you've got a bunch of infrastructure that might have an 80 to 100-year estimated lifespan, a rule of thumb is to percent away, 2% of the replacement value away in reserve contributions annually to replace that system. You can do the math at a 100-year lifespan over that the age of that infrastructure, replacing everything once in that horizon. We have a little more sophisticated approach to this. Like I said, where we use that 25-year and 100-year replacement costs to inform what you need for reserves. For your system, that 25-year cost, what we should be putting in annually from all the contributions from partial taxes and rates is $149,445 a year. We're not near there. We're about a third there with the current rate structure. The 100 years on the left for $112,000 a year. Like I said, typically we want to kind of end up somewhere in the middle. For each system, it's a little different how we land on a number for that reserve contribution. And again, like I said, with that kind of vision to not load everything on you guys that are currently paying rates. Over time, again, there's only so much opportunity for that when you've got a system aging out. The majority of it at the same time. The two other charts here just show the replacement schedule of the assets in your system. So you can see in this first bar graph, this is the 25-year replacement needs, and you see this giant, that is 2023, that's a giant spike up there. That's just showing that the majority of the pipes in the system, mostly asbestos concrete, have all aged at the same time and are now at the end of their life, and they should have been replaced in 2023. These graphs, and then the one side, it's the 100-year, where you can see things are a little more spaced out again. You're kind of replacing everything in that 100-year time frame, and you can see the needs there. This is a rough idea of what needs to be done. In reality, you don't go, all of my pipes have aged out at the same time, I'm going to replace them all in the same year. You take a risk management approach to it, and you go, okay, what's a reasonable way to build a construction schedule around this asset replacement schedule? Yes, replacement schedule is this huge, imposing need that's identified, and you want to have that construction schedule and contribution schedule that matches, again, ability of the system to pay for it, and the ability of us to manage the projects, contractors to deliver those projects. But it still speaks to that need to replace things that have reached the end of life and avoid reactive repair and replacement. Any questions on that? Actually, that's the end. So Uli and I are, thank you for joining us, Director, here to delve into the details with you and answer your questions in detail. If I don't have the answers, then
I'll go for a moment back to your question about if the project comes in lower, do we adjust rates? So when I said no, that was in regards to this year's rate. We adjust rates every year. Every year we look at what are the immediate needs, how urgently do we need to get to this capital project, what can we do with building, and what's the preference in the community. And that is actually one of the things we want to evaluate when we talk to you at our community advisory committee, is what is the preference of delivering capital projects through borrowing, cash financing. We should probably talk briefly about grants and grant availability.
yeah.
So
Risk management maybe as well.
risk management, that's the other one, how willing is the community to put up with broken pipes, having to fix shifting costs from capital to increase operational costs. Let's talk briefly about the grants. We do pretty well write annually grant applications. We manage 18, 19 systems depending on how you count. We have had good success with grant applications for reservoir replacement, for meter installations where we have metered systems, for treatment upgrades. We have written, I'm not sure, 2 or 3 applications for multiple systems, distribution system upgrades or replacement. And these ones were never successful. We have talked to the granting agency, represented by UBCM, and press the urgency of shifting grant programs from the typical upgrading treatment and reservoir replacement to the needed on sophisticated distribution system. So far, we have not seen that coming through. There was just a recent announcement for the strategic priorities fund. We will again reach out to you to see if their priorities have shifted somewhat. But if we see any chances, we will continue to apply for the distribution system upwards. But we need to understand that these grants always compete with the 18 other water systems, if it's not a joint application for multiple systems, and all other services within the regional district. So you have pools, arenas, you have research recovery, so waste and recycling programs, you have fire department, you have emergency services. All of these services the regional district delivers are ultimately, if we have to receive that. We are competing with a limited number of grant opportunities with all these services in there. And even if we are successful, the being the one writing the grant, that's no guarantee that we are successful. So the current announcement that we just heard allows up to 4 grant applications for the regional district. One of them being what they call
build like a
build communities or something like that, which is ultimately likely going to be for asset management for other services, because other regional district services haven't done what this was just sharing with you with the asset management. The other 3 grants we will have as a senior manager school in the regional district meeting where we talk about which projects do we have that could apply for grants, which ones align well with the scope of eligible projects, and then we will present a list to the directors or board of directors for their decision to see which grant applications we are allowed to submit. So that's generally the process for grant applications. There's a couple other grant opportunities out there, but it's tricky to use. So one of them is, if that's the phrase, is here, is community works grants. Problem being that is a grant that is more or less in the hands of the regional district, but in your community, you fund indirectly BC Hydro, because BC Hydro is paying the rates for more than about 55% right now in the community. I'm not sure now. For all the residents that were already in the community at the time when the system changed hands.
2012,
I believe.
Got the presentation. I think it was after that. I think it was 2011. 2011. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where we are. Since then, we have 45% of parcels switching from the original owners to new owners, which now these new owners are paying their own water rates.
Even though there is federal funding, in federal funding, federal bank, nobody can provide it, only supply ratepayers. You want to speak to, you want to speak to the item that
yes.
Yeah, So I supplemented them, 30 grand. And
Any money that is put in, that's not because of the rate, everybody benefits, including these. So they pay the same rate as new owners here do, but anytime you come only in from another source, you see hydro like with that much. That's
yeah, and I, what I did was I tried to take about 30 grand, and I had so far. So I was trying to get them to implement something of value for the people. And so far that's not sure.
That's good to know. So I've got the conversation started with representatives from BC Hydro. So I've yet to nail a meeting and get, the lawyer representative, and they've got a hydro systems representative as well in there. But I'm relatively new to the water department. I'm not new to the water world, so this is good information for me. So when we draft up that formal agenda for them, I'll make sure they include that as well.
So that's the discussion we want to have with BC Hydro, right? The assumed asset needs for the system by far is that they projected. We know now that
Yeah.
so they did provide reserve to the system and they transferred over, but the assumption for useful life as much as the cost protections for the safety design were, didn't hit them all.
Yeah, if you suddenly reduce your assumed lifespan of the pipes in the ground, like I said, are the majority, they're 90% of your asset value or more. So if they've suddenly gone from, we assumed 80 years and we took it over from BC Hydro, but it's actually 50 years, it's already on a aged out. That's a big change that affects how we have to
You
manage.
have to say 13 years ago, nobody was talking about them. The common practice, and still is common practice that possible here on the but for us, we know that if the user is good, we only do the is so i.e. if a line is on the pavement, then we can assume that road is never going to go anywhere and will not disturb that pipe. Where the risk lies is as this pipe ages, gets soft, and when you start no longer using it, it becomes dry. Now this product in 20, 30 years from now goes from its current state, which we call non-friable, meaning it's a solid material, to a friable state. And in a friable form, the risk management for asbestos is a lot more difficult than it is in non-friable. Right now, these guys can excavate it, can take it out without a risk of the ground, they wrap it on that and polish it. When it becomes powdery, now this is a complete different form of removal. You have to pretty well encase it, just like you do in a building where you have friable asbestos, if you have insulation or something of that nature. And it becomes a very expensive project in the future. So our effort is as much as we reasonably can remove the asbestos in order to reduce risk into the future. We really don't want to lose legacy products for the next generation. Yes, please.
25 years ago, that's much higher than most oils in the and it's because of the so what is my understanding is There's a capacity for the fluoridation.
That is one of the issues, yes. So I mean, of course, if you have more information, sort of just pull the memory, the wells likely can sustain higher development or more dense development. You don't want to test all that well, expanding it, but the more dense your development is, the higher is or the lower is on the per lot cost. Reservoir, again, going off of memory, I believe your reservoir would be okay for slightly increase.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
And then there is your distribution system. And again, I believe the distribution system must be advanced, right? Capable of doing that. Chlorination, as I mentioned, we are a system that does not chlorinate, so we are actually handling your system under an exemption that the board allows to risk manage your system. So we developed a procedure. I believe once or twice a year, we do shock chlorination for your system.
We did that this year as well. That's already been done for the spring.
Okay. To minimize risk, but we know we are not fully compliant with the material treatment rules for water, but they have accepted the shock chlorination and a couple other procedural things that they're doing with the system as a risk management approach to the system.
Yeah, whether the subdivision process becomes an issue though with,
yes,
with that risk management, with that administrative risk management approach, leveraging the long-term water quality advisory rather than providing treatment with chlorination. The province is of course signs off on the subdivision that occurs, and it's either unlikely or just not possible for them to sign off on those subdivisions. So that limits growth as well. Likely through.
There's one exception that I want to point out. At the time when we took over the system, first before, when your wells were established, these wells were actually on private property, and there was an agreement between the property owners and BC Hydro that a certain area that was already subdivided but not developed can be further subdivided and connected to the system. It's rough property, if you are familiar. So that's the exception. Likely even there you would have to see what the legal details are, but that may be the exception to the expansion that we. Sorry, I don't.
So let's talk about manager. How can we change the rules, or what do we have to do?
You likely would have.
There's a few ways to lower it. I mean, risk management is what it's possible to, right? Right now, we are trying to replace your system at a reasonable rate. Like I said, it's mostly aged out. The pipes that need to be replaced have already aged out and we need to replace those pipes. But again, it's also juggling risk, the risk of breakage and responding and having to pay for that response with potentially having slightly lower rates over time as well, and tracking out those planning out those construction projects over a longer period of time. So yeah.
And the people that want to have to do it, they would have a certain cost, but overall the guarantee would also have cost and how long would it even take for it to make a difference, and how many hookups would you actually need to add that would, because if you're talking culture and Edgewood, they already have how many more hookups, and may have a number more. Yeah, and so, but yeah, they also have, for various other reasons it costs. You know,
Yeah.
We will talk about the building system to reduce the cost of illumination.
I can also talk about, oh, sorry. I think there's
A little bit on the CPF and the.
yeah. Yeah, it's the same rate. It's the same rate. The BC Hydro pays for it. So our discussion with BC Hydro, we'll look at it. It's a bad name for it. The intention of our discussion will be, you know, the main point will be, can carry, you know, can you guys pay, you know, $4,000 a connection per year and take some of the pressure heat off the ratepayers that aren't covered under the BC Hydro umbrella here. You know, we,
and so, you know, this is probably just, you know, design that you can either design and what I'm designing most strategy because we don't get to the and based on what constrictiveness of what.
In regards to your numbers, that's the numbers from 2024. On a partial basis, it was 45 parcels received the rate for the day and actually and 25 had to pay directly. That might have shifted by a couple of things, but that's on a partial basis. Now, on an account basis, again, that's a little bit different sometimes. One account, you have a couple of parcels included, but so that's roughly the number. They're paying the same rate.
No,
they're not paying
they're
it.
not paying us going off, right? You have to pay anyway, but you have to give them. Well, yeah, okay, so I gave a grant of $50,000. And, but, you know, that, whatever the percentage difference is, that chunk basically supplemented the hydro as opposed to the whole party just being able to save my rate where, you know, bring down the rate to some degree or, you know, provide a little bit of a buffer that it wasn't enough, you know, because the majority of it was a large part portion supplemented the hydro, particularly in all of it.
So I think the important part is that we will pick up the discussion with BCI and see if there are any ways we can have them consider anything. One of the things we will propose is if future increases, if we are allowed to start developing a differential rate for BC rate holiday properties versus paying properties. But again, I'm sorry, talking before the really too many details, but that's
the intention, yes.
That's our intention to have the discussion with BC. I don't know what chances you have to have that approach, but that's pretty well. We can do it.
We're trying to put a strong case together, you know, with the initial assumptions, the realities that kind of came about after the transfer that we were now aware of, and that is all a reality and your reality, and put a case together for that.
We could look at chlorination on the system, and again, It's solely up to the board. Your director will certainly gauge. We hope that this group helps us to gauge the wishes of the community. And we can, we can do that in an hour here to meet with the general public and see hands up, right? At some point, I would suggest if we go and change current practice, we probably would do some kind of community survey. Is that something else? No, but you have I mean, if you have 30% of the community sitting in here, it can be indicative. It may not be any guarantees that the majority thinks the same way. And we certainly need to ask at the same time the question, who is paying themselves? So who is the original resident that receives the payment to these shareholders? Because that's a component in that decision making. So that would be, in short, the process. We will need to gauge what the community wants. We need to bring that back to the directors, the board of directors. It's not a decision of your director alone. There's a board of 20 that is decision making. If the community wishes would be to coordinate, I cannot see the board having a objection to that because it's ultimately reducing the risk for the regional district. So they likely would be supportive if that's what the community wants.
Let's be clear. I and I think there is any kind of alternative to lower the cost. And I know that you're not changing the timeline because all these are recommending
No, we're here to, you're the CAC, so we're here to hear feedback from you. We did talk about risk management. So, I mean, there is, if we get feedback from you, so slow down, that's something we can take into account.
And as we said earlier, that is something we will gauge every couple of years. Anytime we do a pipe repair, we get feedback from phase 9, the contractor, or if our own staff is out here, we often ask them to cut that piece of pipe out to provide it so we can assess softness inside, outside, how much wall strength do we feel we have with that pipe. So we will gauge that all the time and we will calibrate our budgets accordingly. So right now you have 2 capital projects. The first one this year that is going to be cash financed. And then the second one that would be about 2/3 borrowing and the rest reserve contribution. We have currently identified another 20% increase for next year, and that is part of what we need to gauge with whatever new information we get, capital project costs, pipe conditions, and whatever. We will recalibrate that, and that is a discussion we bring to this group in late fall, likely November-ish, December-ish, sometimes it's as late as January. So we bring the draft budget and we have the what's reasonable and how much are we willing to risk manage, and then we bring that budget back to the directors, and the directors say, "Hey, staff, you're out to lunch," or they say, "Yeah, we can live with that."
We are the RDCK, yeah.
If there is any answers, we will definitely have it by September. There's no point writing this out. It might need a couple meetings to have the right people, decision makers in the room, They likely have to get that approved from upstairs, but we'll see how far in the level of PC Hydro we go up. For the transfer of the systems, we had very senior management talking to us. I don't know if you have any chance.
Yeah, I'm speaking at the senior manager level right now. So again, there's been a lot of turnover in retirement. BC Hydro with the people involved in the original transfer, which makes for a little bit of gap on their end. But again, we keep pushing. Here you go.
When I talk to other rural directors like myself, we're not getting the growth in the rural areas like the municipalities getting. So it's a slow thing in our area. And also this is a very underserved rural area. And so that's also
sometimes they have self-triggered development projects that include the community leaders there are looking at potential senior housing development. So there's a project like that.
So we don't qualify for
Yes.
There's not really room for anything else.
Yeah, there's a bit of a sensitivity analysis too, right? We've got 54 active connections. What does each additional connection really help? Spread out that system cost, reduce that system cost. Even systems with 100 connections are still paying high rates, still a small user group. So, yeah. No. It's not going to, it was never going to go to 10 inch. There must be no reason.
It's simply not the flow here.
No. Sorry, what? What do we? The 6.8, the 6.79, I don't remember, is the value of your whole system. That's all the pipes in the ground and the well sites and the fence and everything you guys own. We wouldn't ever put in the biggest pipe in the system here in 6 inches, and that's what we replaced with at the standard.
The other questions you have?
The current replacement value, the current value of your system in today's dollars is, what did I say, is $6.79, is $6.8 million. Yeah, to replace everything right now. What we replace, no, not every component of the system has a different lifespan. So, like a well pump might give it a 30-year lifespan. A new PVC pipe that's put in the ground, we typically give it an 80-year lifespan. So, we're replacing a 50-year lifespan asbestos pipe with now something that'll last 80 years, hopefully more.
Quick disclaimer.
Yeah.
The PVC pipe, that's not around for 80 years. That's what the industry believes it will last.
Right?
So that's our best guess.
Yes, it hasn't been in the ground. There's that as well. Let me quickly touch on that. It could be the pipes, the PVC pipes that are now available. That material hasn't been in the ground anywhere for 80 years. So saying that it'll last for 80 years it's an engineered assumption, right? But that's the best guess we have.
A reservoir, for example, steel reservoir, it's a steel reservoir, concrete bottom, this is a concrete reservoir. they all have different life expectancy, but that might be around 50, 60 years. For replacement, first mentioned already the pumps, wells itself, sometimes they just can enhance it, as we did the last time, we had to clean them all out, and replace the pumps and the variable frequency drives on them. And so there's different assets. Your system is relatively simple. It doesn't have various pressure zones or whatever. But that's what that schedule that Chris showed and shared shows these different assumed life expectancy, useful life expectancy for each asset.
The reason I'm asking that's about 40 years of like about 40 years to pay off $5.8 million. So I'm just curious.
No, back to that graph for a minute. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But you have the ball graph.
Yeah.
So this is our problem.
Yeah, that's our problem. That's
Meaning that the asbestos pipe, and this is a couple of years old, so it's due for revamping that asset.
the asset management plan. I mean, the way you do asset management plan is always a little bit backward looking, just because you don't have all the information you need.
It essentially says all your asbestos if we have them.
It's all the end of life is our assumption.
And your distribution system is what? 80% of the year, 85% of all assets?
No, more 90. It's 5.9 million dollars.
Your own assets is the asset. That's our problem. You need to replace the vast majority of your total entire system. Not the reservoir right away, but not the pumps.
The total system is, no, it's great. The total system, 6.796 is my, 6.8. We'll call it $6.8 million. That includes everything. That includes, all the pipes in the ground, all the service connections up to the property line, that curb stop, the reservoirs, even the fence around the well site.
Yeah. All those road crossing, a lot of all of that is part of that.
Oh, so the $11 million is over here. So I said that we look at asset replacement in what I said, short time frame, that 25-year, and then we look at over 100 years. I mean, this system's going to really live in perpetuity, essentially. So we look at the replacement needs over a 100-year time frame. So, for a piece of equipment that you have with a 50-year lifespan, it's going to be replaced twice, hopefully. Ideally over that.
You might have the reservoir replacement twice in that 100-year span. You might have pump replacement 3 times. You might have 2 well replacements in there. Right? So that's why it's more than the 6.8 million.
Yes. I'd have to look. Yeah,
the tricky part is as well how you finance it. One thing if you cash finance it is one thing when you borrow $3 million over 25 years, that costs about $6 million, right? Because of the interest, depending how much interest goes up or down. But roughly speaking, you're pretty well at least doubling the cost of the money that you're borrowing. So that's the tricky part. So what we are showing right now,
each system, so each water system in the RD is completely self-sustaining.
So that's a very important question. Probably should have started with.
Yes.
Every service that the regional district has is a standalone service. No money in, no money out, with the exception of grants that come in and certain portion of administrative costs that may be shared with multiple services. But otherwise, you cannot, a municipality, for example, they can say, I had a big water line, I take money from my sanitary budget and push it over here. We can't do that. We have services that are strictly regulated and standalone. It does protect as well your reserves, so nobody can grab your reserves and put it over to it. But the problem is that you have to fully sustain your own service.
We took over the system with certain assumptions at the time. We're better informed now. We think that things have changed. We know that, paying nearly $3,000 a year, $305 a month for water, that's too much. We've got, communities with, people on fixed incomes also as well. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think need to be discussed with BC Hydro about that split of payments.
Well, the margin is as high as mine, so, I have to higher than primary paid, primary paid, only and so you have less services, so you pay less taxes, but you have a higher water. You might want to and based on margin. So that's honestly very clear. And so they, so it's just, it's like, we cannot even compare, there's no apples to apples comparison anywhere with all apples. We pay, when we pay for projects, are to the non-unit source for your spread dollars in the holiday, then we're enjoying, a lot more space, so like we have those projects. You know, it's a contract. So, is it set in steel? We can't say, we can set it.
So you mean that BC Hydro will quickly manage on the commitment to pay?
I don't know.
Maybe you have a debate about it. And you guys know the
Yeah, I mean, they broke. They brought the family, all the money and culture. We are so impacted that we already impacted thanks to what has happened here. And so recruiting for building is a really challenge, it's a big challenge here. I have to be careful plan myself
It's funny how the show was 20% increase this year. So,
25% increase. It also shows a 20% increase in 20. Yes. No, there is an acquisition process that there's a moratorium on. So I mean, the RDCK, like I said, we have 18 water systems right now. We've acquired those water systems over time from various irrigation districts, improvement districts, private water systems, things like that. So they're now the opportunity is out there for small water systems to make an application to the RD to become an RDCK water system. As far as users that, go to the cemetery and things, that's different. It's different, yeah.
Issue is a different one.
Yeah.
The same issue that we have.
Yeah.
It's tricky. I mean, we it would actually, if we lost and we remove some of the public watering points that they had in the community for that reason, Edgewood is in a bit different situation where their wells are not as strong as yours are, with larger community. So I'm talking about yes. So when we replaced the wells and had to replace the wells, they were the original wells. So we kept the original wells as a backup system. Your wells, because of the proximity to the hydro users, but in reverse, will likely impacted by surface water. So there's a little bit of a give and take. So you don't have the issue that we saw in Edgewood where we need to be concerned about external users taking away water that they have to manage already. But I see your point. That's a problem. And they go where? To cemetery?
So these are just off yard, they're filling up off the yard hydrant.
So, can I make a suggestion? When you see this, and I'm not talking somebody coming with a and if somebody comes with significant tanks, take a picture of the license plate and send it to us. We have ways of identifying people because this is essentially theft. We can have that discussion with people that use the system in that way. So that's again a thing we went through in Edgewood. We actually talked about having a water station, but it's not cheap to have a place for relatively few users to fill up water.
There's a high, I've managed systems like I used to work in Ontario in large systems for consultant and Hamilton, and actually ran developed bulk water stations, and they come at a huge cost.
And I would add to it, your place is even more difficult because we are not necessarily fulfilling our requirements for potable water because we don't have a coordinated system. So now to have a station that sells potable water, we would never meet the requirements. So, but even if that was the case, that you had potable water, meeting all requirements from interior out, the cost of a station like that is significant.
Yeah,
because you need some metering devices, you have a
cross connection, control, yes. Yeah. You're not metered.
No, and it's like, and then your meter to a party, but they use. You don't know, you can't, we have nothing with that, you know, they want to donate to, you know, our brother, they're giving them water instead of giving them my breath. Yeah, so,
Is there anything that we can do in terms of like applying for grants or talking to government level? And another thought that comes to mind is if we are having to pay so much in cash for a long period of time, could be more of someone else that's going from the government.
So we are actually going through what's called MFA, Municipal Financing Authority. Yeah. So we have already preferential rates that are typically, I would say, at least 2% lower than if you go to we would prefer.
What we do though, I mean, we keep our ears to the ground if there is a rate change that is favorable for boring. So I mean, say, rates do go down in the next couple of years, that may change the equation for us where we go, hey, it makes sense to bore over.
So far you have no plan.
Yes, you have more.
Projected for next year, that is proposed to be a 5-year, what we call short-term loan. So the interest is not, as I pointed out, it's a 25-year loan, doubling your cost. But it's still not, absolutely. Yeah, so that's the balance that we need to discuss as a group. When we look at projects and project financing and rates and whatever, that overall picture. What's reasonable, what's your preference?
As far as grants go, yeah. I put it like this, governments like to give out grants for things that you can cut a ribbon in front of, like a new water treatment plant, or similar. Cutting a ribbon over a pipe under the ground just is not sexy for them, and it's never been, really well funded from the grant side of things. So, I mean, you can join your MLA as a citizen and make that point, and we do that at UBCM every year. I mean, we make cases through the directors. We help them make cases for looking at grant opportunities for different aspects of our operations, including water. Because we're paying for this two projects that we're doing. We're paying for the main replacement.
But it is a good question.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. I mean, if you look at your contributions to reserve for 25, with the 25% increase that we just notified, you're contributing $53,000 to reserve.
In that year. Just that year.
This point out, sustainable 25-year rate over a third of what we should be putting aside in agriculture. So I'm happy to review the 10% for next year. This year's too low to but I'm happy to have that discussion next year. So what the 20% next year does, it increases the contribution to reserve from 53 to 99,000. And I'm happy to have that discussion. Should we do 10 and 10 and 10 instead of 20 and 5 and 5? I'm willing to have that discussion anytime we have a slower increase of these rates. We have a higher amount of borrowing likely for the capital. So this capital project for next year, pretty much put us already on hold for 5 years. So we have a loan paid off and a couple of months. So we do in 2031. That's the big picture I would love to discuss with you as a group and get feedback. How aggressive do we want to be with these rate increases? How much do we want to push the problem out? If it comes to a point where it becomes unsustainable, we like to push back and have that board decide on that. But generally speaking, we want sustainability, we want risk mitigation, we don't want it push out to future generations only. No, I understand that, but to go 15, 25 I'm happy to work with you. We had a public meeting here in Lister a week ago where we were even more aggressive, where we had 30%. And the communication with the community on that side. We presented a separate budget for 15%. In that meeting, said, is that knowing what you know now, if that's where you want to go. And the first year, got under 15%. But there were people that said, now that I understand the dimensions of the problem, for me, I rather say 30%. That can happen with people that understand it's becoming unsustainable. They have a slightly different problem than you have.
It's still tight, but not, yeah.
It's not especially tight. They have a huge rural properties, and they have kilometers and kilometers of line that they do. So it's not the special problem, but it's somewhat substandard plastic pipe and kilometers and kilometers of line. So it's a big difference, but essentially the same issue.
Exactly. Interest rate, we're doing the construction project now. We're going to get that pipe out of the ground, like Louis said. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to see what condition it's in. And like I said, part of this is risk managing, the rate of what we do. We're also, we've got a contractor on site now who's making pretty good progress. If we get good construction pricing, that kind of goes into the equation of whether you want to continue with this project. Say, I'm going to get probably pretty good bids over the next few years with this that are very competitive that I might not see in the future. Maybe it makes sense to do these works now.
But you always hope, you always think, okay, we can make that last, we can push it out, it will go, and then in the end, yes, I can also on top of it. And we saw massive increases to construction costs that we didn't anticipate, and that's one place. So we try to moderate these rate increases as much as we can. Sometimes, like in this case, we get off of it. And we have to do something like that.
2026, well, I mean, this project, if you're speaking just this year, you've got this year, then we got next year. Yeah, we've still got, so I'd have to take a look, we've still got.
These two projects replace maybe 20%.
Yeah.
Reservoir, honestly, probably 40 years old. It was new when we took the system over in 2011, I think we said. So it's already 15 years since then.
The reservoir, I have 1990 as an install date.
1990?
Yeah.
So 35 years.
Yeah. And the reservoir has a 50-year lifespan. It's a steel reservoir. It's got a 50-year lifespan in our asset management plan. Yeah. I don't know if it has concrete. I have to look it up.
Yes, probably steel one we did about 6 years ago, assessment of all the reservoirs. So we have more or less a mini submarine that we can put into these reservoirs. We take pictures of the inside of it. And in 5 years, we empty the reservoirs, fill them out, and do a thorough evaluation. 6-7 years ago, we found 4 or 5 of our reservoirs that we thought still had 60-70 years life expectancy that they were becoming really rapidly rust holes, mainly in the bottom. Excellence was actually one of them that we had to replace before we saw people. Also was one, this was
Weimer?
the impact.
Weimer.
Was
yep.
one. So we had to aggressively, quickly replace these. If we do check them regularly, sometimes we can do some inspection. Rust
inhibition, yeah. Some corrosion, yeah.
The more susceptible ones were the ones that had steel bottoms, or that they had than the bases, the ones that last a lot longer with the concrete base. And almost assuming you have one with concrete base, I don't think there are issues with this.
I don't know. I might have it at my fingertips. But
So that little pieces that play into the longevity of some of these assets that people always know.
I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I can certainly give that information. The reservoir has a replacement cost of, whoops. Still reservoir, 2040 replacement year, $300,000. 300 in today's dollars. No, again, the pipes are where your money's at.
But you're right. I mean, if you say you're paying for the next 5 years, that project off, then you're already, when he's 31, 32, you're already 8 years away from the reservoir being one of your next potential capital replacement.
Yeah, the things with the lowest lifespan are the SCADA systems, supervisory control and data acquisition
So
systems.
that's something you do every
10, 15 years, yeah.
If I would be happy if I could stabilize that only after the inflationary. Yeah, that would be my goal, right? So keep the 2% or whatever average you have on inflation.
And I would be happy.
Yeah, I mean, God, I was shocked when I looked at our mapping. I was telling Udi on the drive up, you look at our regional district, we've got the GIS map and everything, see all the things that we're and I'm like, oh, it kind of like really kind of sunk in with me. I'm like, oh wow, that's how expensive things were.
So if everybody's okay, we wrap up the COC meeting. We have 10 minutes or so public exploring arriving, and then we'll have our regular meeting. Essentially the same presentation.
Yeah.
If you have additional questions,
And if you got any questions, shoot them to me. Think of any information you need and credit to you. I can. Everybody's got my email. Okay. Yeah. I need one to take over.
I know I got the